Welcome to Stuffy Science with Professor NoWit Taal and Mark Tommerdahl. Today we are going to discuss the use of brain imaging for brain injury.
So Professor NoWit-Taal, you know a lot about sensitivity and reliability. I see
Yes,
you
indeed.
published a few papers on it. And I think you stated that the only thing that's reliable is something that gives you the exact same answer every time.
Well, that's sort of the definition of reliability, is it not? It's the same every time. It's reliable.
But shouldn't things change with changes? I'm just a laboratory assistant, so
My
I
brain
really don't
hurts.
know.
Stop asking me these irritating questions. You always do this. Let's look at some data, okay, shall we? As you can see from the images, we have imaged a human brain using a CAT scan. Now, to the unaided, the uneducated eye, which is probably yours, you can't really see anything because it's all fuzzy. But to the trained eye, we can see the finest detail of brain function and anatomy. I can see individual cells talking to each other because I know what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, my assistant, Mark Tommerdahl, cannot.
I can't see it. Yeah.
Well, let me just tell you that if you know what you're looking for, you can confidently tell someone they don't have a brain injury. It's entirely imaginary because the images before and after are precisely identical. And I can say with great confidence that... Get out of my chair, you nerd! Hey, Mark.
You're
Sorry.
You're still wearing Professor NoWit-Taal's bow tie.
Yeah, let's get rid of that.
Must have been really bad.
No, this is me. It was a rough fight. Rolling around on the ground. Let me cough the dust out of my lungs. Okay, goodbye to Professor NoWit-Taal, and let's talk a little bit about what data actually tells you and something about sensitivity.
What slide are we on?
We are on slide 3.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, we're rolling.
We're rolling.
Now we're back to normal.
We're back to normal, making many mistakes on every slide.
Making more grumpy science. And
So
today's talk is about sensitivity and reliability.
Yeah, what is reliability and what is sensitivity? And a lot of people in science look for reliability in data, images, and stuff like that. It's not really reliability they're looking for. They think they are. That's what they say. They're looking for validity. What is valid data? Do you know the definition that I was taught in graduate school is that valid data is both accurate and precise. Right? It's valid because it gives you a good enough estimate of a value that you're trying to measure that it is something that you can analyze and think about. It's valid data. Reliability, especially in its common usage, means something else. It means it's the same every time. And unfortunately, in science,
we have problems.
People have come to value reliability over validity.
A lot of people get confused about reliability with repeatability, and they want to see the exact same answer every time. Let's say if you took a CAT scan of your, someone took a CAT scan of you, I'm not sure why, say every day of the week.
And it was the same?
It would probably be pretty dang close to being the same, and you wouldn't see any differences from one to the other. But let's say you were doing brain game measures every day of the week. You might, and then one of those days, one or two of those days, you felt pretty bad.
Or maybe you took some medications.
You took medications, and your scores are different. Well, Professor NoWit-Taal would have said, that invalidates your measures because those measures are not repeatable, because it shouldn't matter if that person's on medication. But if you want something that's sensitive to any change in brain function, you kind of need to be able to detect, medication.
Function. So you're not looking at the structure or anatomy of the brain. You're looking for functional changes. So why don't we go ahead and switch to a data slide that shows real data. How's that sound?
Yep.
Here we are.
Here we are. And first, let me explain the experiment that we did. This was published in 2008 or 2009. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, it was a long time ago.
You're more than quoted. You're on YouTube, dude. It's forever.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because we only do one take here.
We make a lot of mistakes. We own them. That's the way it is.
So we're always, as long as we've been doing this stuff, we've been hearing people say, that's not very sensitive. So we said, let's give about the weakest dose of anything we could give
Something totally harmless. The average person would take it and wouldn't even think twice about it, right?
Well, actually, so what we did was we did a dextromethorphan study.
Which is?
Now, it's cough syrup. It's DXM.
Ta-da.
It's known as cough syrup.
Okay, so how many people like put themselves in a padded room after they take cough syrup because they know there's going to be some change to the function of their brain?
And we actually had trouble buying those stuff because, well, if you tried to buy the right amount that you needed for the study, you were flagged at the drugstore because it's a drug of abuse by high school students at the time.
I don't abuse it. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but anyway, most people have taken some kind of either cough syrup or some medication that made them fuzzy-headed. And you kind of go, well, yeah, it's fuzzy. You're fuzzy-headed. That's a symptom. That's not really a measure that relates to any mechanism.
That's how you feel, and there's probably some validity in that feeling because it seems to correlate to real data.
Yeah, but the real part of this is that dextromethorphan is what's called an NMDA receptor blocker, or NMDA receptor antagonist. And we've been studying the effects of that on repetitive stimulation, which we've talked about before. We've been studying that for years, but in the studies that we did on animals, we used something much more powerful. You know any other NMDA receptors blockers pop to mind? Street drugs?
Actually,
no.
You're talking to the wrong guy. I don't know anything about it.
So people are most familiar with PCP, phencyclidine, Angel's dust is another word for it, ketamine. The active ingredient in those drugs is it's an NMDA receptor antagonist. That's the mechanism. And basically what it does is it just makes you, if you give a very powerful drug like that or like PCP, it's like every stimulus is novel. In other words, there's no repeatability.
So you never get tired of it. Oh, wow, wonderful. I'm experiencing the
everything's
universe new every second.
So you don't really process things.
Right.
So dextromethorphan, very weak form of that. So we said, well, it should have an effect on repetitive stimulation, and that's what adaptation is all about. Well, this graph is a result of that study.
Walk us through.
And so we have 3 different time points. What would you guess T0 is?
Before
drug ingestion. Now, by the way, we had 2 groups of people, and that took this. They either took the drug or they took a placebo, which looked just like the drug, and their data looked the same all the way through. So we don't have it up here. It's kind of boring. But
the control data means
it does.
In this case, we took it, but nothing changed.
It does.
So we're not going to focus on it.
It's the kind of thing Professor NoWit Taal would like because
he'd love it.
Repeated.
No change.
No change.
Nice, the same all the time.
Anyway, this is a sort of the nerdy format that we've talked about before. It's the B1 and B2 is B1, smaller numbers are better. B2, bigger numbers are better. Okay, B1 is the baseline for B2. And so if you notice, B1 does not really change over the course of T0, T1, T2. That's sort of that's your response, or your accuracy score to in the presence of dextromethorphan with a very short stimulus. Well, then we did a conditioning stimulus, which should make you worse. And that conditioning stimulus, in the case of T0, before drug ingestion, made everybody worse, controls and druggies alike. But T1, look at how much smaller that red box is.
So they weren't adapting to it. So the point here is the dextromethorphan prevented the cortex from adapting to the stimulus, which is not good.
Right. And then T2, which is 2 hours later,
starting to clear up a little bit.
It's looking like it's clearing up and things are starting to go back to normal.
Right. So the bottom line here is you can see the big difference between the black bars and the red bars, especially at B2 and B2 that's black, B2 that's red.
Yeah.
Is that the smaller bar represents a lower ability of your brain to adapt.
Exactly. And the critical differences between B1 and B2 for each of these. And so at T1, 1 hour after ingestion, there's not a big difference. And that's a fairly weak dose. So But if you
that's
think about
that's what you take normally, right?
Yeah, but
it's nothing special about that.
If you think about, well, it was a double dose, so 60
milligrams.
milligrams.
So most people would take. Right?
That's what most of us take. It's a recommended dose, 1 ibuprofen. I take 4. So, but
I always follow the instructions exactly. It's just the way I am.
I'm not recommending people take too much of anything.
Right,
but
but this is science. So that was the dosage, 2 times the recommended dose on the bottle, right? Roughly.
Yep.
And then 1 hour later, it was a very clear indication that the brain was failing to adapt.
Yeah.
So if I may, I think it's time for us to go to the next slide.
Yep.
You ready? This is just simulated sort of garden variety CAT scan image that shows you what you would see, which is no change. It's not something you can image on a CAT scan, but it's something that you can detect. It's not from the DXM study. It's just
sort of an emphasis that
the
brain
emphasis
gauge
here
is a functional measure.
Brain gauge measures function, and it can detect changes that you can't see on an image.
Correct.
Right.
And basically, the CAT scan is going to be extremely repeatable, but the brain gauge measure will not be because of the medication. When
a kid gets their head hit in soccer, and their parents start screaming, do something, is my kid's brain injured? Physicians may eventually relent and do something like an MRI or a CAT scan or something, which does put people in harm's way. But then they're able to say, and they know they're going to say this ahead of time, it's not revealing, it doesn't show anything. So then the advice you get is, well, we don't see anything, there's no lesion there, so keep the kid off the field for a few weeks until they feel better.
Well, the main thing that the brain imaging is good for
you can make
is
sure
to making sure it's not
injury.
Moderate TBI, that it's not worse.
If there's a lesion, something really broken, that's a totally different story. But what percentage of concussions are actually due to a brain lesion?
It's pretty small. But
Very
more and more people are getting checked like this, and more people are paying a lot for scans. But
so as we get more and more people checking at a lower and lower threshold, what you'll see is that a diminishingly small percentage of these scans would show anything to anyone. And if it does show something, I'm not even sure they can do anything about it.
But what a lot of people don't realize is like the Army's definition or the Department of Defense's definition of different types of traumatic brain injury are that if you don't see anything on an imaging modality, then it is mild TBI. If you do see something, then it's moderate or severe. So you have to see something in imaging to classify it as moderate TBI.
That's kind of an important point, because is it CAT scans that are the gold standard?
Yeah, the FDA used that as a gold standard
for detecting TBI, when by definition it shows nothing for the mild form of TBI. Isn't that interesting?
Right, and the first people that went through the rigors of getting FDA clearance for being a concussion measure had to use CAT scans, and what they ended up doing was changing their FDA approval from mild to moderate TBI, because this is the problem when you have to, everyone has to compare good measures to crappy measures, because that's the way the FDA works.
Yeah, that's the way they go. So basically the point of this video is that we just want to show you that the gold standard measure, up until recently, maybe they've discarded it finally, but the gold standard measure for brain injury is one which by definition will not show you the most common type of traumatic brain injury, mild traumatic brain injury. It's just not sensitive enough, and it's looking at the wrong thing. It's looking for changes in the anatomy and the structure that really probably aren't even there. You couldn't image them no matter how well you could see it. It certainly doesn't have the resolution to see them even if they were there. And so it's the wrong tool for the job if you're looking to detect mild traumatic brain injury. So because you've got the wrong tool for the job, it's not only is it unrevealing as to whether or not you've got the injury, but it's also unrevealing as to whether or not you've recovered. Right? It doesn't say anything when you're at your worst. Right? So how can you use something that doesn't tell you anything to tell you, okay, you're okay now, go ahead and play sports again or something like that? And that's the point of the brain gauge, that it's sensitive enough to tell you when there is a change in function, and it's sensitive enough to tell you when you've returned to your normal function. And it's something you can have in your home. And I guess the cost of one CAT scan would buy how many brain gauges? 4, 5, 6, and tell you nothing, and subject you to a lot high energy radiation and a lot of expense and tell you nothing. So once again, it's a case of the wrong tool for the job. And I guess that's about all we can say.
Well, we're going to get a few more haters on this, but I wouldn't say that. But,
yeah, that's right.
I figured the Professor Know-It-Alls of the world probably ain't going to watch this one.
Pretty much, if you want to find a Professor Know-It-All, all you have to do is find a university with a medical school. And there's 1 or 2 Professor Know-It-Alls in every department. They're just a basic kind of garden variety staple of medical research. There's lots of them. Most scientists are not like that. Most of us are just people laboring under the shackles of a really bad system, right? Professor Know-It-Alls tend to run the joint, and they don't really contribute anything, but they tell you a lot of things with great authority. But let me tell the hater, okay, before you go get all your friends to give us thumbs down and this and everything, I have nothing against CAT scans, right? In fact, one of my best friends, his uncle, did the math that made CAT scans possible. I think they're wonderful. I think would be about 91 years. They're a great tool. They're a perfect tool for the types of things that they're intended for. But this is, in science and in medicine, there's this, if you have a tool, if you have a hammer, you have this tendency to think that everything is a nail. And if you have access to and you can bill for a CAT scan, then you tend to do those procedures, even though going into them, they're not going to be revealing. And so there's nothing against CAT scans per se. I think it's totally cool technology. What I have a problem with is the way that, clinical and research medicine and brain injury is conducted, asking the wrong questions with the wrong assumptions, using the wrong tools, and drawing the wrong conclusions.
I agree.
All right.
All right. That's enough for them to dislike this week.
That's right. Give us your thumbs down, whatever. We'll make fun of you in a subsequent video. See you later.